Welcome, everyone. Today we have a very special episode. As you can probably tell, this is going to be in English. And the reason is simple. Our guest today is British, and we are going to talk about communication skills in international work environments. Joanna Richardson has more than 2 decades of experience helping Spanish speakers express themselves clearly and confidently in English, especially in professional and international contexts. I personally admire her deeply. I'm incredibly grateful because she coached me a couple of years ago and helped me rethink how I communicate my value, not just for the job interviews, but throughout my whole corporate career, I would say. And Joanna, welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you here. You may introduce yourself, of course.
Thank you, Effie. Well, you say I'm British, but really, we know each other because I relocated to Argentina many years ago. I don't even like to say how many years ago. And actually, I am nationalized Argentinian. So yes, because at one point I couldn't vote anywhere, and it's horrible not being able to vote. So I'm able to vote now in Argentina, which keeps me quite busy. And I do think that the fact that I am based in Argentina, and I generally work with people a little bit like yourself who are Argentinian, but maybe they work abroad in Germany and other countries. I also work with a lot of Argentinians in Argentina proper, but I do think it gives me a kind of the fact that I can see things both from a British perspective, because obviously you can hear that I am British and I'm not going to stop being British, but I've lived here so long and I do just about understand this country, well, at least understand the complexities of it. And so this gives me a kind of two different angles. And I actually think it's one of the things that people most come to me with, because they say, yes, I'm working for a multinational company in Argentina, and I have to explain to them about foreign exchange restrictions, to give you an example, or tax or something like that. So they have to be able to explain in a nutshell the very considerable complexities of Argentina to an audience that has no understanding of them, and to explain those in English. So, and that's definitely one of the things that I'm able to help my clients with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for me, it was a real game changer because when I started working with you, I think one of the things that I appreciate the most was that, as you said, it was easier. Like, you knew the mistakes that I was going to make because I was Argentinian. And because, yeah, of course, I'm a Spanish speaker, but also an Argentinian. And I think that part is really valuable.
Obviously, there are specific mistakes that a Spanish speaker will make, and maybe things that they need to be particularly aware of, such as false friends, and that kind of thing. But I don't just work with Spanish speakers. I mean, I work with people, native speakers, a few, and I've worked with people from France, Turkey, North Macedonia. I had a student from North Macedonia, China. I have, and languages which I have no concept of. And obviously, this is as a teacher trainer, that's a little more challenging, but I can still do that. But my goal is, as you say, that above all, I mean, I think this is something that's very, very common. People come to me and they're kind of like, well, I can speak English, but I feel, and a doctor once said this to me, and I thought really stayed with me. It's a very strong sentiment. And she said, when I go to a conference, I feel as though I'm a second-class citizen. And doctors are, yeah, there you go. It's a strong statement, isn't it? So I feel that my role is to help people grow, to be able to express themselves. And, maybe you're never going to get to quite the same level in English as you are in your native language, but you're going to get pretty close, and close enough, and be satisfied with that, and to feel more confident being able to to talk in English.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I will not lose hope of speaking with the accent that you have in my native language. If you want to share a few words in Argentinian Spanish, I think it's worth it because you are amazing.
Pero yo tengo acento. I mean, I have an accent in Spanish. And I
No.
think, I speak very porteño, but I do have an accent. I mean, I know I have an accent. And I think that this is one of the things that people always, especially in Argentina, people always fight against. They're like, no, because they want to not have an accent. And your accent is part of you. It's part of your identity. It's part of who you are. And obviously, so when I correct people in their accent, I normally correct them when I say, well, this person is literally, your audience isn't going to understand you if you speak with that strong accent, or you're saying a word in a strange way that people can't understand or something like that. And so that's when I correct accent. But I don't normally correct accent because I consider that your accent is part of you. My job is to help you find your voice in English, but it still has to be your voice. It shouldn't be anyone else's voice. And I think that's also going to help you build your confidence when you're expressing yourself.
Well, you make me feel better, for sure. And before we start with the question for this season, I wanted to ask you something, because every time, or not every time, but many times I recommend you to one of my clients. They often think you teach English, but your work is very, very different. Can you explain a little bit more what you actually do and why communication coaching goes far beyond language skills?
Yeah. Yes, it is always a tricky one to explain, because I think people have a very strongly structured idea of what an English teacher is. And and of course, and I would never say, people often come to me and they say, oh, no, because, I'm a beginner and I'm doing this. And I'm like, you're a beginner, go and get an Argentinian teacher. Don't even bother with me. I mean, I do not work with people who have basic levels of English. I just don't. And I don't even think I'm particularly good at teaching grammar. I think, the Argentinian teachers are a lot better. Obviously, you have to have some grammar, and I have had students who I've had to do. I call this a refactoring, because often you have to kind of take people back a stage because they have kind of very bad mistakes with the verbs or the tenses. And so you have to kind of take them back a level, get them to see how to construct verbs or adjectives and adverbs or whatever their issue is in English, and then they can move forward. And it is a slightly painful process, because people say to me, oh, Joanna, but I'm speaking so much slower and it's taking me ages to express myself in English. And I said, yes, because you're actually thinking about what you're saying rather than just saying the kind of horrendous mistakes that you've been saying for decades. And so what we're literally creating here, and I don't pretend to be a neurolinguist or anything, but I'm just that you're sort of creating new synapses, creating new connections. So what I do mostly when I don't have to teach people grammar, which is a relief to both me and them, is to help them express themselves in English. As I said earlier, that horrible phrase about the second-class citizen, help them with their confidence. I give them structures. People often come to me and say, well, it's okay if I prepare for a meeting, I'm just about okay. But then they ask me some surprise question and I have no clue what to say. So I give them like a structure about how they can cope with improvisation. And then, normally everyone that I work with is an expert in their field. Whatever their field is, I work in all different fields. And so if you have a structure, and which can be which is like a rhetorical device, then you can kind of slot in your content. And that way, anytime you have a structure, it's going to be much easier for the other person to understand what you're saying. And it's also going to be less stressful for you, because let's remember that the stress that you're experiencing when you're not being able to express yourself in English, I mean, it is, you become a little bit angry with yourself because you're like,
Yeah.
you're a smart person who's well prepared, who who is used to being able to express themselves in their own language. And so when you can't, and that anger and that frustration comes over at some level, even online, people can perceive that. And that's kind of, you slightly lose control of the situation. So there is a strong psychological aspect as well. So I suppose that, I teach people how to improvise, how to use different structures, how to use the language of business. I mean, my core business is still plain English for lawyers, and I still work at the Universidad Austral, giving a yearly course doing that. That's obviously what I used to do at the law firm Marvalo Farelli Maidal in Buenos Aires for nearly 20 years. And many of the clients that I work with are lawyers in different areas. But I've kind of, as it were, graduated from plain English. I realized that for business people, speaking clearly and plainly is not enough. You also have to be, if you're in business, you have to speak the language of business. And so some jargon words and some kind of typical business expressions, you're going to have to use them and understand them for sure. Because otherwise you won't be respected in business circles. And a lot of people, I'll give you an example of a word, pivot, the word pivot. Yeah. And everyone's going, yes, I know what that means. But, I know it means change and everything, but like, I would never use it. And I'm saying, well, you're going to have to start to use it. So I will coach someone, for example, I work a lot with role play. And so let's say, okay, you had a difficult meeting, you weren't very satisfied with how it went. So I asked you to describe it to me, and then we'll role play that meeting with that new vocabulary. So again, what we're doing is we're naturalizing all your access to that vocabulary, because people often say to me, well, I kind of know that word, but it sort of never pops up into my head. And I said, okay, but if one doing the role play, it will pop up into your head because we're creating that access to it. And so that's a lot of the part of it. Sort of, I would say, structures, rhetorical devices, the language of your industry and the language of business, giving people access to that. And I suppose that, it's also, I mean, to go to your question, maybe people take communication in their own language for granted. And they don't really think about it because it's just something that happens completely naturally, unless they've studied communication skills. So when they come to a second language, they just sort of think, well, this should happen. And I'm kind of showing them, well, unless they actually study it, it isn't going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Exactly. The other aspect, another very challenging aspect that people often find is networking.
Oh my God, I still fight against it. I know. I remember we worked together 2 years ago,
That's
about
right.
2 years ago. And I'm an introvert. I hate
Yeah.
networking.
Yeah, but people, I think Argentinians in particular have a very much a hate relationship with networking. I mean, for people who are unbelievably sociable, it's very odd that they hate networking so much. But it's like Argentinians want to be sociable with the people they like, not kind of random strangers who might help them in life. So I teach people kind of some skills, some good ways of doing this, and to think about, networking less as something transactional and more as some way of connecting other people together. And generally people find that a lot more helpful because it ceases to be about them. So they're kind of suffering a little less. They don't feel so much in the hot seat. And then I also work in other skills for people who have to moderate on panels or who have to speak on panels. Last year, and I feel happy quoting this because she wrote me like a page testimonial. Gabriela Terminielli, who is a very interesting woman. She was the first woman on the Argentinian Stock Exchange.
Oh,
And and she's not very comfortable in English. She's much more comfortable in Spanish, and she worked with oh my goodness, I should have looked this one up. It's like the women's she worked with the women's forum. I'll look it up afterwards and send it to you so that you have the correct information. And so it's getting more women on boards, and she had to go and speak in Miami. And so we worked together for 6 months and working on a script. And of course, you know, a script is something that people always ask me this question, well, can I just use a script? And I said, well, yes, you can use a script, but let's face it, you're going to be up there and you're not going to be kind of scurrying around looking at some piece of paper or whatever. I mean, it's going to be very uncomfortable, and you could, well, in some panels, you do absolutely know what the questions are going to be, but you know, there could be a genuine dialogue afterwards and you don't know what the questions are going to be. So it's important in a scenario like that you prepare for surprises as well. And you can prepare, especially with time. And she was very consistent and, you know, started nice and early so that we had time to prepare. And so she was super flexible, and that made her feel very confident. So she was able to speak up spontaneously because we had worked on her script and she had really incorporated her script until it was natural. And that's something, I mean, I would never send someone to just kind of go with the script and just read. That way of communicating has really gone out the window with TED Talks. People, you know.
yeah. And also, you know, it sounds weird when for example, of course, your introduction, I read it, of course, you know, and you always said to me that I sound like I was reading. I don't remember the name of the word that you said.
It's called reading voice. It's called
the
reading voice.
That
Yeah.
is like a little bit plain, and yeah.
It's flat. It goes flat. It lacks emotion. It lacks connection because it has to do with the how you're connecting to the reading word rather than how you're connecting to the person. Because really, what all this is about is creating connections. What are we trying to do? We're creating connections, but just creating them in English. So you have to get beyond certain emotional barriers, which is why also one of the core aspects of my training is storytelling, because people have to be able to tell their stories and give their presentations using storytelling, using a narrative arc, and using those kind of techniques, because otherwise they just become meaningless.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember that I struggled a lot before we move on to the question that I wanted to ask for the episode. But I think this is really interesting. And yeah, something that happened to me that I really struggled with closing the thoughts. So the structure that you gave me, you remember, like the 3 points structure, it really helped me, like afterwards, like it's still helping me, because I'm always like, okay, I need to close my thought with 3 things, and that's enough. Effie, shut up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this is very particularly difficult in another language, because like in Spanish is a language where you can just kind of keep on adding, you know, forever. And people feel comfortable kind of talking for a bit longer than they do in English. But in English, you know, especially if you're working with people abroad, they don't have a tolerance. And all that happens is that they just stop listening. And that's online in particular. People have stopped listening even earlier because online is generally more boring than in real life. And so it's very important to be able to present that structure and to be able, well, I think that starting with a framework and to be able to close your idea so that your main idea is like the takeaway, so that the other person can leave with your main idea.
Yeah, and also, so with this structure, you are able to really convey or like deliver what you really want to say. Because in the end, if not, you feel like, okay, I didn't make any mistake, but I didn't say anything at all. Right? Like, okay, it was not worth it. It was a lost question that they asked me in an interview or whatever, right?
That's right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. You haven't got your message over to them.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe now we can move on to the question. So this season starts with a question I'm asking all my guests. And it is, what unwritten rule do you feel you had to follow in order to fit in at work, especially as a woman?
Yeah. I mean, I looked at your question. It's a very interesting question. I mean, I do consider myself to be a feminist. I do. And I say that like upfront. And I've always said that, you know, even before feminism became back into the whatever it is now, third wave, when it became, there was a whole period when it wasn't fashionable. So I've always believed in feminine, and I've always considered myself a feminist. But I was sort of thinking about this. I mean, I think the other thing you have to take into account, like I didn't really work in-house anywhere other than the law firm. And I suppose that in a way, the fact that I was both British and a woman could have been a kind of advantage rather than,
Yeah.
you know, because it's like, you know, because I was just, I mean, as you say in Spanish, un perro verde. I mean, I was just like weird, you know, just like, you know, didn't really kind of enter into any kind of, you know, they couldn't categorize me. But I was thinking about it. I mean, one thing I do think, and the lawyers, you know, I still have a wonderful relationship with them, and they really respected me, and they all still, you know, whenever I come across any of the lawyers, they always like thank me for everything I taught them, and which is really, really nice. So it's nice to see that sort of, as it were, cascade, through generations. But what I was going to say is I never, you know, if you're trying to show someone a different paradigm, which I suppose is what I was definitely doing with the lawyers, and in my training these days as well with executive presence, I try to get lawyers to write in. It's more about writing, but because that's mainly what lawyers do in Argentina, to write in plain English, and obviously that's not something that comes naturally to lawyers. So, but when you're getting people to change their paradigm, is not to do it aggressively. I mean, this one thing I learned very early on, like, don't fight with a lawyer. Obviously, you're going to lose if you're fighting with a lawyer,
Of course.
because they're much better at it than you. But like, you know, just show them and say, well, you know, think about it, that kind of thing. So I think that, and maybe that has to do with being a woman. I'm not. I mean,
It definitely has to do with being
you know,
woman
but
because
like not going in being confrontational, offering up the possibility of doing something in a different way, as a kind of like a gift, as it were. You know, take it or leave it. If you wanna run with it, if you don't, like, that's fine, your choice, sort of thing. So maybe that, I think that's my closest. I don't know if that's exactly.
Yeah, all answers are correct. So I think this is really interesting because, so as a woman, what if we try to be assertive, but we are not warm, then we lose our opportunity to really get to the other person and make them do whatever we want them to do, right? So in the end, being warm, this kind of empathic, and also being assertive, of course, you are going to be assertive because you know your field, right? So in the sense of being assertive is easier, but then if you're not warm, you are perceived as aggressive. And women perceived as aggressive are not listened to. So I think what you said is really, really valid and interesting. And yeah, thank you for bringing it. And I remember when we worked together, you shared a story about someone who held a very, very senior position in LATAM. I work with many senior women from LATAM as well. And yeah, this person wanted to move to an even higher role in Europe. And I wanted to ask you, from your experience, what really makes the difference when ambition professionals or women, men, whatever, want to grow internationally? And also, if you can share, what do people often underestimate as well?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've helped a lot of people with promotions. And I think here, I mean, this does apply in particular to women, because I mean, I can remember the first time I helped somebody apply for a job with the World Bank, and she was like, there's no way I can do this. There's no way I can do this. There's no way I can do this. I mean, she was so insecure. And that's when I hadn't really come across it before. And I mean, I'm not someone in your generation. She was like, she's actually older than me. She's now retired. And in your generation, you're all very familiar with imposter syndrome. And a lot of your generation, especially the young women, they come to me and they say, oh, I've got imposter syndrome. And I'm like, okay, all right, interesting. And then we start to work on it. And really what it is just like lack of confidence. I mean, that's, and also, I always say that imposter syndrome is kind of quite healthy because it means that you don't think that you can do everything in life, and I said, well, yeah, you're going to have to prepare, and that's how you're going to get over your imposter syndrome.
And
Anyway,
you're growing, right? Because you're going
exactly.
beyond your comfort zone.
Exactly. But the main problem is when you think that you're not actually capable of those things. So I said, well, okay, let's print out the role. I can remember this is something I generally do with people when they're applying for a job. And I said, like, print out the role and let's see if you can do these things, or if you've done them before, or if you've done something similar that is a transferable skill. And we were like, went through them and it was like, tick, tick. Okay, what Americans say check. I not tick, tick, tick. And I said, you see, you can do all of these things. And she was like, really? Are you sure? And I was like, yes, of course you can. You can do all of them. And now we just practice them and, build stories so that you have examples of each of them. And she was like, yeah, I guess I have been doing this for, whatever it was, 40 years already. I mean, maybe at not such a high powered level, but she'd been doing it and she got the job.
She just
And
needed to phrase it, right? Correctly.
exactly. She needed to frame it and she needed to believe in herself. And I think it's often very difficult to see those transferable skills. It's like, because because you're it's a kind of wood, you can't see the wood from the trees situation. I mean, it's like it's very difficult to know what I could do or what's similar to something that I have done. And that obviously when you're moving up in a position, that's very hard. People who are growing or moving in a multinational, going from something maybe local to something in international. And yes, and probably, being more structured. But I mean, I was helping someone in Buenos Aires the other day, and I was saying, well, isn't there an agenda at this meeting? They said, no, there's no agenda. And I'm like, well, you better learn to have an agenda because that's not going to wash in the rest of the world. And that kind of thing. And so, sort of learning all those real management techniques as well.
Thank you. This is really helpful. And yeah, I follow everything you do and everything you say. I really like following you on LinkedIn because I think your experience is so valuable. And you always talk about the transferable skills that you just mentioned. And it's so important because nowadays we have so many people changing careers as well, not only going to a higher role but also changing careers. I myself, I changed my career from engineering to marketing manager, and then I was struggling when we met to communicate why I did it. Because I did it because I just wanted to work from home, and I cannot say that, right? So it's like, I want to work in pajamas. No, I cannot say that. So I need to build a story behind it and also find the transferable skills to show them that I'm able to do the work they need me to do. So it's so important that you mention it.
As I say, but that's also important that you start believing your own story, because people can tell when you are kind of making a fake story to cover something up. I mean, everyone can tell that. And so you have to find a story that, like it really resonates with you as well.
Yeah, and it's been more than 2 years, and I still use the same paragraph that we practiced so many times in the role playing. And I really hate those role plays because they were tough and they were out of my comfort zone. And I was like sweating and having a really bad time. But I was like, okay, I need to do this. It is worth it because, I'm going to finish with a really nice story to tell when I go to job interviews, but also when I go to networking spaces. And I always said the same about why I changed from engineering to marketing management. And I have all my speech like prepared from that time, and I always change them bits. But it's really nice to have it practice and Yeah, it's part of me
Exactly,
right now.
exactly. So you have your core, but you can improvise on your core and adapt it. Exactly. So this is also a technique that we get from stand up,
Mm,
where if you think that a stand-up comedian, if you've ever been to a stand-up comedy, you'll see that they have a kind of like a core story, which is normally circular, and they have it practiced and thought through and everything. But then they're able, because they have it practiced so well that it's literally kind of part of their heart, then they can talk about it. They can add sort of like random elements that might have happened that day or in the audience or whatever. And that's the improv part of it. But you do need to work on that. And as you say, I mean, it is a painful process. I mean, growing is painful. You have to get through that, and it's emotional as well.
yes.
It is definitely, because learning, you're pushing yourself. Absolutely.
But it is so worth it. Like
Hmm.
after our classes, I felt so, I don't know, grateful, but also proud because, yeah, it was something that really always bothered me. For me, it was like, I always thought that my English was really bad. I learned English as an adult, and yeah, I was not confident at all. I didn't want to speak in public. I hate speaking in public. So I had all these, yeah, imposter syndromes.
Like almost like hang-ups. I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
things that you told yourself that you couldn't do. And
definitely.
so, and I was saying like, you're already doing this, Effie, and you're kind of like, really? Where? But
And
you
now
but
we are
you
recording an episode in
and
English.
it's
Wow.
that's pretty amazing. Definitely. Wow. I'm very
I
proud
still
of
cannot
you.
believe it.
And this is
Thank you.
something that I also wanted to say, that for me, the greatest pleasure in my work is when I see someone grow. The greatest pleasure in my work when I say like, you don't need me anymore, like you're flying, that really is my greatest pleasure. I don't feel the need to kind of hang on to my students. I'm kind of like, off you go, do your thing. You can always, like, you have some big presentation and you want to practice it, you get in touch with me and then we'll do it. But my idea is that you're able to speak up and literally find your voice.
That's super nice. And yeah,
Mhm.
I'm going to come back to you when I prepare my TED talk in the future. I'm pretty
Absolutely.
sure.
Absolutely. I'm sure you will.
And I wanted to ask you about one of your articles. I remember one in particular because you write for the papers and also you write some articles. And I remember one in particular from the COVID time.
Mm,
And it was about communication in time of crisis. And I think you were in a repatriation flight from the UK, right?
that's right.
Something about it that I wanted to ask you. What did that experience teach you about communication, but also leadership and clarity?
Yes, it was a very scary experience, of course, for everyone. And we were being repatriated. We managed to get out of England through Brazil, and we were coming back in through an airline. Okay, I'm not going to say which airline, because it's probably like some sponsorship problem. But it's kind of a low cost airline. I think everyone in Argentina will know which one I'm talking about. And we had this amazing flight assistant, and she wrote to me afterwards because somebody sent her the article,
Oh,
and so I think I still follow her on Instagram or something now. But anyway, she's super cool, and she just had this very, very good management of this very difficult situation, and keeping everyone calm, which is of course what a flight attendant is supposed to do, but they don't always manage it. And she kept everyone calm, and she was totally in control of this very difficult situation, where we had to literally landed in Buenos Aires, and there were 8 people who had symptoms, who had to get off, who they were taken away by medics, and while the rest of the plane was waiting. Yes, so I think that was definitely, I mean, I don't normally teach crisis communication. I work in Argentina with Marcela Gola, who teaches oratoria y storytelling, and she's an expert in crisis communication. But like, I mean, occasionally I have a client who's kind of like has to explain to their headquarters about some sort of crisis, so that, then I might help them, but it's not something I do on a regular basis. But the basic rules of crisis is that you don't ignore the crisis, that you talk about it, and then you talk about how to move on. And this was something that she really managed to do. Yeah, goodness me, you've taken me back in time as well, Effie. One of the results of that, of the COVID, is that for me it was a liberation, because I realized that I could just work from home, because before that I'd given the odd class online, but I hadn't really, when in the pandemic I started to the different companies that I was working with, then they asked me to give classes in India, in Poland, in the Ukraine. And so for me, it opened a lot of doors. And of course, working with people in Europe like yourself. And I never, I mean, a lot of the teachers, my fellow teachers, they sort of say, oh, it's so horrible working online. It's so boring, this, that, and the other. And I was like, yeah, well, but you can do different things. You can, I always make an effort to like show videos, have like a sort of comic moment, maybe share a cartoon, like work with a mentee. You have to mix it up a bit. You have to, as a teacher or a trainer, I do think that working online requires more from you. You can't take it for granted.
More creativity.
Exactly. And you probably have to, I think that you have to have a kind of a voice that will vary as well, and really make sure there's variety in the class. Sometimes, for example, if I'm working in a class with someone who does need grammar, well, I'll do like half the class grammar and then half the class like some communication skill. Mix it up, because as I said earlier, people's capacity, their boredom threshold is much lower online. That for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And
But
they get
also, if you're
distracted.
boring in person, you're gonna be boring online, right?
Oh, that for sure. But in person, as a teacher, you pick up much more quickly that the person is bored.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So
Or when you
definitely.
lost attention or whatever. Yeah, that's right.
But I still do try with the clients that I have in Buenos Aires. I try and meet up with them once a month in person. And it is still different. There's because obviously they're giving presentations in real life. So if that possibility exists as a trainer, I consider it my responsibility to train them in real life as well. And it does make a big difference. I mean, the other day I was working with someone, we were doing a really challenging role play of a very difficult conversation. And we were face to face. And I looked at her and I said, do you realize that you stopped breathing? and that I think online I wouldn't have noticed that. I think it would have been really hard to notice that online. Whereas as we were in the same room, I could see that. And I said, okay, now breathe. And now we'll do the conversation again. And then, I managed to get her to breathe, because she was literally so tense that she had stopped breathing. Yeah, pretty powerful stuff.
Poor thing.
And yeah. She had, it was a tough one.
Yeah, I can imagine. And what you said about COVID is, yeah, for me, it was the same. As I said, I love working from home. And for me, it opened up so many opportunities. And also, yeah, as I also already mentioned in this episode, I'm an introvert. And yeah, I remember also reading one of your articles about coaching an introverted person. I think the name was Federico. Or I don't know if it was a fictional name. And you said he was afraid of public speaking, and he tended to hide rather than step forward. So I felt like, yeah, it was me. That article was for me. And you use football, a soccer metaphor. Yeah, it really stuck with me. And yeah, what advice would you give introverted women who want to grow in corporate environments without pretending, right? Because in the end, what we try to do is pretend that we are someone we are not. But that's not the solution.
I always advise them to read Susan Cain's book or to watch her TED Talk, because obviously she's the person who drew everyone's attention to the power of quiet. And again, I always say, we're not looking to make you into an extrovert. but rather that you still have something to say, but you just might say it in your own kind of quiet way. And rather than trying to say it in a way that doesn't feel natural to you. I mean, your generation is much more sensitive to authenticity than the way I was brought up. And so you really like literally refuse to do something that you're comfortable with, which is, you know, an admirable quality in your generation. But on the other hand, you know, you can't just sit quietly in a meeting and let people get away with absolute murder, well, and not speaking up. So it's, again, it's a question of practicing and like taking baby steps, you know. I mean, I always say to people, okay, well, if you're not going to speak, at least think of a question. So you're sitting in a meeting and you're proactively thinking of a question. And then like one day you're going to pipe up and say the question. You know, I work with someone incredibly senior, a CFO. I have to be confidential about this, but in a very important company in Argentina, and she had to speak on the investors board. And, you know, we worked for a year and a half before she would dare to speak up.
Wow.
It was so difficult. It was really difficult, but you know, learning to speak out, it can be a slow process. And she's definitely not an introvert even. It was just, you know, very challenging. But I think taking baby steps and kind of congratulating yourself for taking baby steps, you know, for those small progresses. So, okay, well, today I thought of a question. Okay, next time I'm actually going to ask a small question, even if it's something like, when are we meeting next? But sort of getting familiar with the sound of your own voice. You know, people often tell me, no, exactly. I mean, the other day we were doing an in-person course, and somebody's saying, no, I can't even listen to my own audios. And I said, well, you know, I think you've got to kind of love yourself a little bit there. You know, it's like, you know, that your own audios, they're not going to sound that bad. And actually, when we heard her, when she gave the presentation, she had a really lovely voice. You know, a lot of people are very like hypercritical. It's a bit like that sort of body dysmorphia thing.
Perfectionist.
Yes, and they just think, well, no, I sound weird. I mean, we do sound, when we hear ourselves recorded, it is always vaguely disturbing because there's some sort of anatomy thing about the bone and their ear or something. It sounds different to how we perceive we sound. But you know, you have to get used to listening to yourself and listening to the fact that you are going to say something.
I'm going to have a hard time editing this episode for sure. I was telling my audience yesterday through my newsletter that this is going to be a really contrasting conversation. Like, you are someone with a voice from Downton Abbey, and I'm Sofia Vergara from Argentina. And I was like, okay, this is going to be weird, but it's okay. I'm going to do it.
I don't think I'm quite as bad as Downton Abbey, and I really hope not.
Not bad. I love it.
No, but I know, but you know, people like me who live in Britain have had to sort of soften their received pronunciation a little bit because there's a lot of pressure now, and you know, healthy pressure. In Britain, regional accents are more respected and different class accents, but it's kind of like, you know, this is my accent. I can't really pretend not to have.
I love your accent. I really love it. So no worries about it. But I was just laughing. And I have two more questions. Apart from the accent, what do you think people focus on that actually doesn't matter as much as they think? Or it can be the accent, if that's your answer.
I think it is the accent. It is the accent. And I think that in Argentina, because of the bilingual school system, which has many advantages. I'm not speaking up against it, but it means that the people who didn't have that privilege, they always feel out of step. And so, you know, it's very tough for them to kind of compete. And so I think in Argentina, it's definitely the accent. And you know, for me, the most important thing when you're learning to speak another language is that you can get your message over and that people will understand you. And that's really all that really matters. And sometimes you hear people who have like the most terrible accent or really strong accent or don't even have great English, but you know, they get their message over, and that's all that really matters.
Interesting. And do you feel this is only for Argentinians, or when you work with these people in Europe, in
Yeah,
India, China?
they tend to be less hung up about it. I think it is a bit of an Argentinian.
Yeah, I think we need to go to a therapist more. I mean, I go, but Argentinians, we all go. Yeah, my last question would be if you could leave our listeners with one idea or mindset shift about communication in international environments, what would it be?
I think the main thing, is that less is more. Because obviously anyone from a Latin background is always going to kind of go on a bit, it's just like, and also the sort of people that I work with, they know so much about their topic. And so they feel that they have to show everything. And I always say to them, no, I want you to think of an iceberg. You just have to hint at the 90% under the water and show the 10% above the water, because that's all your audience needs to know. And it's very hard when you're an expert in a field to show less. But if you look at the world's great communicators, you'll see that there's always kind of like, it's a subtle hint at everything, but you're only showing the highlights. And for that, you really have to work on your communication. You really have to polish it. But like, what are the ideas that what do I want them to leave with? I want them to leave this room. I want you to leave this podcast with that idea. And so they go away and sort of think about, okay, next time I have a meeting, I need to show a little bit less.
That's amazing. It's like a teaser, right? But you really need to practice, because if not, you speak like me without closing. And yeah, I want to say thank you. That's the problem, right? I want to say thank you for the conversation. What really stayed with me is this, that you said that conversation is not about sounding perfect. I think for me, you really open my world in terms of valuing myself and communicating it. And yeah, I think before we wrap up, I would love for you to tell our listeners where they can find you, and for those who are interested, how they can work with you.
Okay, great. Well, I have a website, which is Plain English Argentina. I'll send it to you afterwards, Effie. And I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. If you look for Joanna Richardson, Buenos Aires, I think I pop up fairly.
We will leave it linked in the description anyway, so they can find it there.
Exactly. And do connect. And I'm always posting, if I don't have time to write something, which I'm afraid is the case recently, I try and post kind of articles or tips. I'm also on Instagram. But my main idea is to promote the other people who are working and producing great content and useful tips as well. So not just posting my own material. But it's been a great pleasure, Effie, to be able to talk with you, especially at such, it's not often that one has as much time as this to be able to talk about, all different aspects of the work that I do. And I think that, in general, I'm just really happy that when I see my students like you, being able to live their dreams, that's just lovely.
That's sweet. Thank you so much. And it's been a real pleasure to learn from you, to work with you. I will come back to work with you for sure. I'm pretty sure. And thank you, everyone, to everyone listening. If this conversation resonates with you, please leave a message, something for Joanna, for me. And yeah, thank you so much. See you next time.